Resentment for the mortal life. I grew a total resentment for the mortal life, the life of crawling into one's own inner cave. A cave where only the good die young, the bandits die younger, and those in between are tossed into a hell in between. I wanted some vague notion of a distant love between masturbation lotion and something else. A girl I could travel to Europe with, leave the United States behind, and travel her old country of Alsace, where the flowers were always blooming, even if it were not the land of the University of Flowers. Ride on airships and hot air balloons, and think of soft, fluffy teddy bears. I wanted my life to be beyond anything I've ever known. Anything but this sense of hate. Anna Marie's head was not traditionally beautiful. She had very long curly blonde locks with a flower in her hair. At times I think I see life in her eyes, and yet I can not be certain any was ever there. Is that what a severed head looks like? I thought, because it was far more beautiful and yet more tragic than anything I ever imagined. When I stared into her face seeking comfort and love, I thought of the times that we could have had together. At times, I do her makeup for her even though I've never been good at putting it on myself. I miss everything about her, and yet now she is here with me always. You might be surprised how easy it is to hide a person's severed head, especially if the state already considers them to be dead. To think that I could finally fulfill my desire, and yet this desire feels so empty and sad. There are times when I wonder, quietly as I write notes to my publisher, why it is I choose to waste my life. There was a time when I had wanted to go horseback riding with her, but we lived in a time when there was no more need for the cheval. When I was hiding from my parents, I visited the place that we used to spend together, and I would keep her beside me, hoping that there would be something that could bring her back. I brought my favorite sub sandwiches, but I could not be genial to a severed head. Is this the point that we all come to when I've seen the dead? Curiously, in an extra measure to extend the suffering of those sentenced to the guillotine, when France had taken control of the United States, they had created a special kind of guillotine prior to the invention of the guillotine gun, the razor arrow. This method of decapitation had special rests for the arms, such that prior to the victim being beheaded, they would drive blunt screws into their wrists, much in the same way back in the Middle Ages torturers would use thumb screws to extract confessions. This was generally used for specific political crimes, such as those involving espionage and information gathering from rival American states. Even if the guillotine continued to be relatively quick, the executioner would delay their execution as long as possible in order to make the ordeal as painful as possible to extract the most information. The only reason Ahina Marie never underwent this was due to the grace of being female. Receiving special treatment on account of being female is hardly a unique thing for the 21st century. During the Middle Ages, women were generally burnt at the stake, rather than drawn and quartered for this very reason. Often in cases where sentences were commuted, this would mean that women would most frequently be commuted to merely being beheaded, back when drawing and quartering was on the books. When it came to around the long 19th century, women continued to get largely preferential treatment by men. This continued into the Great War era, when France would commute most women's sentences to life in prison, while the men were still, in some cases, even publicly beheaded by guillotine. This meant that up until the Vichy era, women were largely immune from having their heads taken off. This changed when Marine Le Pen became the president, when the far-right wing began to take control of the French government. She had initially lost in 2017, but took control of France in a coup, leaving much of the left-wing establishment in shambles. She undid much of the pro-LGBT legislation that was still on the books, resulting in many gay, lesbian, and trans women sent to similar containment camps as Muslim people, as they would often fight against the treatment of such people. The old slang term for French people was frog. Marine Le Pen was a gigantic demonic toad whose ice-cold blood could cut through you like a stone. Such was the reason that Hemato-Tomato was glad that her family had moved from France when they did. She was never sure how to tell her family that she was into girls. My case was equally tricky. For many years I had mostly considered myself into women, but recently I had become more open about being into some guys, resulting in considerable confusion as a trans woman about the kind of people I was into. And by this point, though it was often treated as a way of being anti-French, I was more against the practices of the French death penalty, although technically I was against capital punishment everywhere. So it made my already frazzled personality worse, as I was unsure of whom I could trust to communicate my real feelings, especially when I knew that in reality I loved French girls more than anyone else. I tried hiding this by trying to find Dutch women to date, and I still liked them very much, but to me there was something about the light olive skin tone and lemon juice dyed hair and the gentle shape of their tender throats as I wanted to gently bite into their soft juicy necks. Hina-Marie used to wonder if I'd bite her in the neck. Instead, the blade of the dreadful Klein did, spraying her blood into the wooden basket, and leaving me alone to my thoughts. "Oh, Hina-Marie, what's up?" I asked. I remembered the first time that we had dated. "I told you not to let your mind wander around me," she said. She hopped on top of the floor of my room when my mom wasn't home. All my worries faded away as if they were merely nothing to be concerned about. I can't date someone who likes dead girls. She noticed the look of horror on my face. "Sorry, I'm just kidding. I didn't like dead girls. What I liked was blood." Not sure what this girl's issue was, who sounded like she came from the hood, but I knew that she would always be there for me, or at least I had hoped, because she was my Hina-Marie. My Hina-Marie who was always there to set my soul free. The Severed Head of a Hina-Marie, Part 1. In high school, I would visit the Edo-Gudo latte machine, purchasing a copy of Gorno anime along with a nice cup of vanilla hot latte. Edo-Gudo was a literary genre that came out of Japan, the original idea being the beauty and the ugly, but had gradually came to mind the fertilization of mutilation and other graphic content. But for me, I didn't care for the disembowelment for a multitude of different factors. But the main one was that generally I only liked severed necks and the blood that would gush out of them. A Hina-Marie would never say anything, but it was a topic that we always tended to avoid. We would talk about other things, like the most current movie we watched on a Saturday night, such as Another Man, Another Chance. I never liked westerns growing up, but made a special exception for French girls, yet inside there was a darker reason. Something that I had kept from the innocence of the world. I would fantasize about ordering a side of severed French girl's head, recline with it on the bed, and dream dreams of sweet little angels screaming before their heads drop. Yet the Edo-Gudo latte machine would always be whirring when my old man was stirring, and I knew, despite the darkest nature of myself, that I wanted to protect my girl from my dad. The girl was Annabelle Lee. And the seraphs I would behead on a guillotine would visit me in dreams and give me sweet teddy bears as a form of peace offering as wedding gifts between me and Hina Marie. It was then that I had decided against all the loss of my hope that we were married in death. I would get constant erections from blood girls with cat-eye glasses, getting in the neck from a National Razor crossbow, shot with a paralyzing agent. I shot the blade as quickly as I could to minimize the amount of pain that my vampires would experience, because unlike these monsters, I actually had concern for their well-being, even if that meant putting their heads on wooden sticks, sticking them in the ground, and watch as others paraded it around town. But in my mind's eye, their heads would roll in my lap. I would remember the sweet angel's scream, and I would feel like ending it all. Hina Marie never did anything to be beheaded for, and yet I had let my father kill her, and there was still a part of me that could not forgive myself for her death, even if in the legal sense it was not my fault. There were hints in my early years that I may become like him, but I didn't want this to be my destiny. I was a shell without my soul. I wanted to be under the knife. When you attempt suicide, some people assume the world will stop for you. The reality is, when you're lying down bloody on the floor, there is a part of you that wanted to die more quickly, so it's basically a non-issue. Instead, one lingers inside of the dirty floor of a motel room with your hand reaching out, searching for someone to take you to the hospital, but being treated as essentially a non-person. Ultimately, I began to make peace with the idea that I would eventually bleed to death. Make peace with the fact that I would never see a Hina Marie again, and simply make my death more comfortable. But I was dizzy and tired, and I couldn't stand up straight. I had not cut my own head off, but injured myself. I needed a bandage, but I was several miles from the hospital. Hope fading nightly, lying on the floor, and yet in the darkness was the spirit of Hina Marie, who reached out as a hand and guided me into the light. But as I walked outside, there was nobody there. There was only the sound of my inner madness, for my lost Hina Marie. It was like a ghost town, with almost everyone inside to hide away from the vampires, but the only one I knew curled her finger as if to call me. I walked forth with hesitation, with my National Razor crossbow loaded. But when I got within range, she ran off. Behind me, I could hear the sound of growling, and it sounded like some sort of freed animal, much like being in a laboratory breaking down the door to eat a person. It tried to bounce on me, and I tried firing the blade at its neck, but I missed. Instead, I heard the sound of a shotgun, the silhouette of Hina Marie firing her weapon from beyond the grave. I flinched. Something that had become something of a habit. The animal died quickly. I looked closer in the alleyway. It looked to be one of the law enforcement's special modified canines, merged with decades of wolf genes into something more muscular and much more fierce. I grabbed my crossbow and aimed. I put it out of its misery, the sound of yelps coming in the distance. I could hear the sound of cybernetic-enhanced police robots. Quickly I hid behind a dumpster as one of them checks to see what happened. The robot then goes back to look for more wrongdoers. The decapitated body of Hina Marie nailed me to the wall. "Hey, Hemato, I need my head back," she said. I grabbed her severed head outside of my fanny pack. It was one of those hyper-stretchy bags that could fit in almost anything inside of it. "I thought you were dead," I asked. "I'm still dead, my dear," Hina said. I had just started meeting my new poetry publisher, James, a little before I met Hina Marie. I needed a father in my life and not a girl whom I wanted to give the knife, or thought that I had wanted to, given my sheer mindfuck at the time. I was a mess of my own contradictions, having recently become an atheist. I refused to listen to benediction. I gave religion the middle finger and gave that tenant an eviction notice. Now the tenant holds out their thumb to catch a ride, requesting a ride toward Virginia. James, who was also of the Satanic Temple, knew my own personal issues at the time, and we were not busy finding editors and cover artists. We would talk about my issues, related to my trust issues, related to French women. We had known each other for a few months, and I knew that he himself was of French heritage, but was one of the few that didn't hold my Americanism against me. If French women were like this, I would go to bed with them right away and give nice bottom buckings on a waterbed. Instead, I generally had less expectations for French men over French women, the tyranny of low expectations, with the men generally being happy there was any woman that was willing to be nice to them, or at least not run away from them. But for me, I had already ran away from my own life.